Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to World United Press. My name is Elijah Dominguez, and today we are going to be discussing the topic of person, what it is classified as person, and where can you find the definition of person. We're also going to be discussing U.S. Code 267343. And we're going to be discussing its civil counterpart, 6671B. And I would like to get this started. So, I actually have noticed that the district attorney, that they don't usually determine, and they never assert that they met all the predicated factual issues surrounding the term person. That apply to criminal penalties. Chapters of Internal Revenue Code, Title 26F, Chapter 75. A predicate issued is determining a factual element of the law. A predicate issue is determining factual element of the law that determines whether the rest of the law applies. So I'll just use my name. If Mr. Dominguez is not a person under 7343, then nothing else after that can be applied to him. Because what I've learned firsthand is that the government is likely to back these arguments. The government will argue that since the subsequent elements of the law were met, that means the individual must have been the person whom the law applies. Did all these people meet the key factual elements necessary to be a person in 7343? Now, who could be charged with a crime? I propose that they did not meet the criteria in my research, and they clearly with cases clearly involving disputes with 7343, not a single person can challenge all the factual elements of law. So in order to understand the factual elements, we have to do some research into its civil counterpart, 6671B, and see if we can make any parallels to the person, to the criminal person in 7343, and therefore ask an immediate hearing. Obviously, you want to ask for an immediate hearing regarding the use of this, because obviously if you can actually argue this and get the judge and convince the judge that you don't meet the actual factual elements for person, you can get your case dismissed or even have your other people released from the jail. So the argument after reviewing the cases determining the person defined in 26 U.S.C. 6671B, that it applies to the penalties in 26 sub F, chapter 68, subchapter B. I found some interesting laws that may exonerate Mr. Dominguez. Here's how 6671 is defined. Factual elements must be the following. 1. Must be an individual. 2. Must be under the duty. And 3. The duty must be connected with a corporation or attached to his position within a corporation. Note that the similarity to the definition within 267343 and in Title 26 Subtitle F, Chapter 75, Subchapter D, 7343 of the term person. The term person as defined in this chapter includes an office or employee or a corporation or a member or a partnership who as such officer, employee, or member is under the duty to perform an act in respects in which the violation occurs. Term person implies an officer, employee, or a corporation or membership of an employee or partnership whose officers, employees, we discussed the term employees under the tax code, I believe that was 6331 and 6334. The person in this chapter and the officers, the factual elements of, so what are the factual elements of 7343? They have never been defined in case laws. And since we have good case law on 6671, section B, so persons will look at what the law and the case law show first. 1. The factual element must be an individual. Nearly universal in civil and criminal cases that I've studied, everyone who claimed that they weren't a person because they weren't an employee, an officer, or a membership or a partnership tied to a corporation. See, you can't argue that. Other positions holding authorities, boards, directors, stockholders, human resources / payroll officers. They went to great lengths to discuss the constitutional and legal reasons why he wasn't a person. So this was the case of Mr. Henderson, and there was a United States versus Springer, which also discussed this. Now, about not being a person, the courts found that at a minimum that they were an individual, and thus could be charged. Here's how the Ninth Circuit explains, including the definitions of person in section 6671B indicates that the liability imposed by section 6672 upon those and the others is not restricted to a class of persons. Got the hiccups. Specifically listed officers or employees of corporations and members or employees of partnerships. Officers or employees of corporations or members or employees of partnerships. By the use of words includes, which is in brackets, the definition suggested, because the S is the, that includes word is a very important term, which defines and suggests the calculated indefinite with the respects to the outer limit of the term. Defined, First National Bank implanted. Now, if you go back to my other videos and you look at those videos, you'll find that there was, with the birth certificate fraud, that birth certificate fraud, that was in 1988, that birth certificate fraud that was in 1988 and 1999, that actually could be used within the term employee, because remember, they are, if you read those cases that I posted, you'll find that they're committing fraud through those birth certificates, creating employers through a birth certificate which is required to be registered. The mother is supposed to sign it, the father signs it. The father is supposed to sign it first, then the mother. And so you are an employee of the United States. Look at the paper it's printed on. It's printed on stock certificate paper. So, First National Bank in Plant City, Florida versus Dickerson. And Pacific National Insurance versus the United States, 422F.2D 26 9th Circuit 1970. Based on this, it seems pretty clear that includes really means anybody. So the limit within the term defined in 26701 described persons is everybody. Everybody's a person. So 2 paragraphs later, the courts clarified that the limit, where the limit of includes ends, indeed, the language itself is not required, that they be officers or employees of corporations. See, you don't need to be an employer of a corporation because you are clearly you can still clearly be charged until you have the paperwork that you need, which is the corporate entity paperwork to show, hey, this is an entity. See, you need to make it where you can protect yourself from liability using corporations yourself. See, LLCs, corporations, non-limited liabilities, non-profits. You can shift that money around with land trust and make yourself the nominee so you're anonymous, but you still own the company. I mean, there's many ways that they use to make themselves limited from liability, and you can use the same tactics. It's available to you now. I lost my spot here. It does not require the employees itself to be a corporation at all, so long as the fact responsible for the controlling 31 corporation disbursement, as we held in Graham Supra 309 F2, the section must be construed to all those who connect with a corporation to be responsible for the performance in an act with a violation occurred. Pacific National Insurance versus the United States, 9th Circuit, 1970. So, on that, they mentioned a disbursement. See, if they know they can get money from you, they're going to try to take money from you. You have to make it so there's charging orders. These charging orders protect your company. See, you need inner and outer protection from these companies which are causing liability, which they have their foreign agents rolling around. Now, in 6671, since the members of the corporation board of directors was not employed by a corporation, it did not serve as an executive officer. This is too narrow of a reading section. The term person does not include officer, employee, but does not certainly include all others. Its scope illustrates, rather than the qualified specified examples in our judgment, the section must be construed to include those who are connected to a corporation as to be responsible for the performance of an act in respects to which the violation occurred. United States versus Graham, 1962. So clearly there, it's saying that the term person includes does include officer and employee, but does not exclude all others. The scope is illustrated by an example. Our judgments in the section must construe all those who are connected to the corporation. So we are still connected to the corporation, therefore would be responsible for the act. Therefore, by putting a nominee, we are now ceasing the connection with that corporation. As you conclude, it's not a good idea to argue includes and including because they are expansive but limited within the terms defined. The limited includes an overwhelmingly clear that this and other cases of a corporation under a duty, this is so clear that the duty is connected with a corporation, that the two fact elements must be provided in order for one to be the person within the meaning of 6671. The interesting thing is that Graham shows that in 6671 applies to everyone, but it also reveals the correct factual issues that need to be proven in order for 6671 to be person. 1, he has a duty, and 2, he has a duty connected with a corporation to be responsible for the performance of an act within in the respects act in which the violation occurred. Now, that second one is going to be very, very hard to do, and that first one is going to be hard to do to prove in 6671B. Now, the second factual element, a person must have a duty to apply the term person under 6671 is by reviewing the case, the overwhelming case involving an explanation of 6671, where applied to 6672 penalties, where the person was required to collect withholdings and tax pay. The person in those cases, there were startling explanations of somehow the term person. In 6671B, it is applied. There are two factual elements in order for 6671B: person, duty, and that duty is connected with the corporation. Duty under 6671 has much more focus, meaning the generalized duty of all taxpayers to pay taxes, and expressly limited to the duty of that attaches to the person, an employee within the corporation. U.S. versus Berger, and that is 1989. The mere fact that an individual is a corporate officer or employee by itself is not by itself sufficient to make an individual responsible person within the definition of the statute. That is interesting, right? What a concept. So, in U.S. versus Combs in 94, not every officer and employee of a corporation is subject to penalty, but only if he's under the duty to perform some act, namely a responsibility for making a deduction in payments. Boda versus Scanlon in 61, Second Circuit. Both cases, Combs 94 was the Second Circuit. That's U.S. versus Combs in 94, and Bota is B-O-T-T-A versus Scanlon. Here's what we concluded from prior case law. Duty has a focused meaning. It applies to an individual taxpayer as a rule. It is limited to those who have a duty attached to the position within a corporation. So you have a duty within the corporation to pay the IRS, apparently, under Boda versus Scanlon in 61. Not everyone who is an officer is a responsible person. Isn't that the honest truth? Excuse me a second. Simply being employed of a corporation does not make someone responsible either. So, just because you own one doesn't necessarily make you a responsible person. Or subjected to 26 U.S.C. 7331. Or 6671B, the term person. I'm in the middle of something, can you see that? I'll come back in a little bit, I'm almost done. The third factual element, the duty must be to a corporation. Up till now, will have shown not that everyone is a 6671 person within the meaning of the law. Just because an employee or an officer within the corporation is not sufficient to establish that one is a person, having the duty to file a tax return does not show sufficient to the duty either in the case law that by saying the duty must attach to a corporation or partnership or connect with a corporation or partnership. The term person does not include office or employee, but does not exclude all others. It is in the scope of its scope is illustration rather than the qualification by the specified examples in our judgments, and the sections must be construed to include all those connected into the corporation as to be responsible for the performance in an act respecting in respects of which the violation occurred. That's United States versus Graham again, as in Graham Supper. That's 309 F2D at 1212. The section must be construed including to all those in connected with the corporation as to the responsibilities to the performance in the acts which the violation occurred. Pacific National Insurance, 1970, versus the United States. The section must be construed and include all sections. A corporation must be responsible and for the performance and acts in which their violations occurred. U.S. versus Graham in 62, Dudley versus the United States 1970 stated, the word person in 6671 includes an officer or an employer of a corporation or a member of an employee or partnership who has such employees or membership under the duty of performance with respect to the acts which the violation occurred. 6671B does not read to be exclusive. In our judgment, the section must construe to include all those connected with corporations as to the responsibilities and performance with the acts in which with respect of which the violation occurred. United States versus Graham, 9th Circuit, and U.S. versus Moore, it says 6671, 1960 in the 5th Circuit Court. It also reads not exclusively. It is in our judgment. This section must be construed to include all those connected with the corporation as to be responsible for the acts in respects to which the violation occurs. United States versus Graham. Now, I'm reading an excerpt, but please remember that just because you can read the little slip that's there, read the whole case. See if it, because it does apply. Well, it does apply to you. But for other cases, like let's say you have like a gun case or something like that, right? And you have a gun law, and you're looking at this case law, and you're just reading a little excerpt from it. That's not going to work because it might not apply to your matter. Every case law is different. Every case is different. Now, in United States versus Hill, a similar context was answered in the 9th Circuit by following Graham. Next, contended that he was not a person under 6672 required to collect the truthful account for and overpaid the taxes in question, since he is not a disburser officer of a corporation and has no authority to draw or sign checks on a corporate bank account. This again we feel is too narrow of construction. The statute's purpose is to admit the tax authority to those who reach the responsibility for the corporation's failure to pay the taxes in which they are owed. It would make little sense to confine liability to those performing a mere mechanical function of collection and payment, which is a function ours to be performed in the corporate in accordance with the executive judgment of those who are under duty to describe the corporation in this area. U.S. versus Graham, 62, and Lydion, that's Liddon versus United States, 1971, 5th Circuit. In the United States versus Graham, 9th Circuit also held that directors could be held liable under 6672, saying that the word person was not strictly limited to officers and employees, but it also included those connected with a corporation as to be responsible for the performance of an act which the violation occurred. See, persons under 66. So now we're going to connect. Now that you have an understanding of the term persons, we're going to connect the terms 6671 persons and 7343 persons. Applicated and applicated to the 26 U.S.C. 7343 person. Now, what does this have to do with person defined as 7343? Well, let's take a look at the case where it directly compares and made in between 6671B and 7343. He contends that a corporate officer is a person for the purposes of 6672. Only because 6671B specifies that the term person, as used in IRC Chapter 68, Subchapter B, encompass 6671 through 6724, includes officers and employees, which the violation occurs, but before the purposes of 7202, the term person defined identical languages to IRC 7343, the term persons as used in a chapter. Now, 220 on IRC chapter 75 is pretty interesting. You have to read through those. Now, that's a lot of pages, just to let you know. That's over 100 pages on those. Where was I? With an action with respect to the violation of color. Therefore, Thayer, as the president, a majority owner of Miss and ELOP, was properly charged in the conviction under 7002 U.S. versus Thayer, 1999. So, because the person in that chapter includes officers and employees in corporations and partnerships whose officers, employees, and members under their duties to perform acts which the violation occurs. So, therefore, he was convicted under that. But again, you have to read the case law. I don't really want to go in too much to that because I got a lot of pages here, and I'm already at 25 minutes, and I got fucking a lot more shit to read to you. There is a couple of things that can apply in 6671B. First off, this person has a duty to perform acts in respect with the violation that occurs in civil, that he was required under 6672 to collect and withhold and pay those taxes to the IRS. Further, this court has held because the person in 6671B that he could be charged criminally under 7202 using the defined definition of persons under 7343. This met the criteria for the civil person 6671B. Thus, he met the criteria for 7343 because those terms were identically defined. Here's two more examples of Congress intentionally making the terms 6671 and 73 identical, but here's one example in the court decision where the courts, even the states, determined that 6672 civil withholding and 7702 criminal withholding penalties tracking the word so that the person is liable under 6671B. Civil penalty could also be a potential charge under 7702 criminal penalties. As the Supreme Court recognized the 702 tracking the wording of 6672 in Sladov, U.S. at 24598 S. CTs 1778 and 7202 corporations are a similar defined of person, USC 7343. Thus, the individual corporation officers and employees can be civil liable under 6672, that the officer can be criminally liable under 7202 U.S. McLean. See, you can use these to criminally charge police departments and charge them and actually hold them on charges, like hold them. U.S. versus McLean, Minnesota District Court. For the purposes of the provision of 6671 defines, including an officer, an employee, a corporation, a member of a partnership who has an employee or membership or duty to perform in the act of respect for which the violation occurs. The penalty imposed in 6672 is a civil in nature. Gaspard versus the United States in the Sixth Circuit in 1987. But in 26 U.S.C. 772, which tracks the words of Section 6672, which makes a violation a 5-year felony offense to complete a symmetrical arrangement of the civil and criminal penalties, 267343 defined person for the purposes of Section 7202 in the language identical to that used in Section 6671B for Section 6672. Now, I'm using legal language. This is very, very complex stuff. See, you have to look up the case of State versus D. Jesus, 642 SO.2D 845 LA. There's Supreme Court 1994. If some element can be found to criminally liably meeting the factual elements of person in 7343, they must meet also the factual elements of 6671B. Based on that, we can reasonably argue that the factual elements of 7343 must be the same as 6671B. Now, defining the terms of 7343 7343. The term person in this chapter is used to include officers of a corporation, a membership or employer or a partnership, or who has such employees or membership is under the duty to perform an act in which the respective violations occur. Remember, that's important. They can only try you if they can prove that you are connected to a corporation and had a duty to perform and meet the factual elements under 6671B and 7343. And if you can prove that you do not meet those, if they can't prove that you meet those factual elements, then they cannot hold you on the charges. The factual elements must be an individual. The individual must have a duty to a corporation. The duty must be connected to a corporation or attached to his position within the corporation. Similar, the interpretation of person. Look at Iverson Ninth Circuit. 1998. Because Congress uses similar definitions to the term persons in the CWA, which we can presume that Congress intended that the principles of Dodowitch applied under the CWA. See Long versus Director's Office of Workers' Comp's Program, 9th Circuit, 1985. When the legislator borrowed an already judicial interpretive phrase from the old state statutes to use it in the new statute, it is presumed that the legislature intended to adopt not merely the old phrase, but the judicial legislature intended to construct to adopt also the judicial construction of that phrase. Citations in internal quotation marks, you can see 98. Congress repeated that a well-established terms that implicates that Congress intended that the terms be construed in accordance with the pre-existing interpretations. Therefore, 4 paragraphs later, moreover, the court has interpreted that in other statutes in the court in decision in Park, for example, the Internal Revenue holds liability to any person to require required a collective, truthful account and pay any tax under IRC 26 USC 6672, and the IRC does not. The IRC defines person. To include any officer under the duty to perform an act in which the violation occurs. Again, there's more consistency. You see, they have to prove, 1, that you must be an individual. 2, they must have a duty. And 3, that you're connected to the corporation. And you have some duty connected to and attached to that corporation. Now, here's the applications for and I think that since person is interpreted simply across other statutes, that it might be interpreted similarly with the same statutes, especially since it has extracted those words. Thus, the same characteristics of one under a duty connected with the corporations is 6671B. Civil, but must be the same. Give me a second. So,